Welcome to Books in the Freezer, a podcast dedicated to the deliciously disturbing world of horror fiction. I'm your host, Stephanie, and today I am joined by author Clay McLeod Chapman to talk about his latest book, Ghost Eaters, and horror books that talk about grief. So, Clay, welcome to the show.
Hey, hello everybody. Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, did I say your name right?
Clay McLeod Chapman?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Clay McLeod. Like honestly, like at this point, like I've embraced pronunciation. It just doesn't matter. It's it's bound to be within the ballpark, right?
I feel that I grew up with an unpronounceable name and then married into another unpronounceable name. So, it is my life.
Just when you thought you were getting out, they pull you back in.
It's true. I remember thinking, like, there's one thing I'm going to do. I'm just going to marry into a family with just a simple, phonetically pronounceable last name. That's the one thing I care about.
Hello, Mr. and Mrs. Smith. Before I say yes to your son's hand in marriage, let me ask.
That it is Smith. It's not Smythe, right? No.
Is it Smithy or Smythia? No,
Yeah. Very happy to have you on, though. Um, so, to our listeners that are not aware, can you tell us a little bit about Ghost Eaters?
oh man, here it comes. Yeah, okay. So Ghost Eaters is it's a book about a haunted drug. So pop a pill, see the dead. This drug called Ghost allows you to see what is kind of lingering on the other side. But as our heroes and protagonists find out, once you start seeing the dead can see you, and they might not be too happy about the the attention. But yeah, once that door opens, there's just no closing it, and spooky things ensue.
I really liked it. And I liked that when we were talking about this, there was kind of a few directions we could go just because I feel like there's so much that the book covers. Like we talked about doing grief, which is like what we decided on, but we also, could have talked about addiction or ghosts. Like there's just a lot going on here.
Yeah, maybe a little too much. I don't know. I
I
mean,
didn't mean it to sound
the
like that.
jury's out. No, I'm saying, I mean, I feel like, you know, the I feel like the most exciting novels. I'm going to make a blanket statement, and I'm going to regret it. I think when you have these books and there are a lot of ideas in it, and you feel like the author is exploring ideas, and maybe some of the ideas kind of like drift off into the wayside, and some of them kind of like root themselves into the narrative. This this book feels like it wanted to like tackle a lot of stuff, and I don't know, maybe I thread the needle on a few of them, all of them, some of them, none of them, but yeah, drugs, ghosts, southern gothic isms, and grief.
Yeah, I really liked that. And I liked, yeah, that it's set in Virginia and that's such a big part of it. When she takes the drug and starts seeing the dead everywhere, it's like, oh, there's a lot of history in Virginia. There's a lot of death, a lot of stuff going on that you have to contend with.
Why would you ever take a drug that allows you to see ghosts in probably the most haunted neck of one of the most haunted necks of our country? It's a dubious distinction, but yeah, Virginia is it's a haunted neck of the woods, man.
And we talked a bit on Twitter. You mentioned because I there's a scene. Well, there's a few ectoplasm scenes, but there was one ectoplasm scene. Maybe it's the first one because it caught me so off guard, and I was like, "That's so gross." I have to reread this chapter again because I just want to really revel in how gross it is. And really thinking that the other big property that has ectoplasm is the haunting in Connecticut. And you said you talked to, was it the person that wrote it or directed it?
No, the director.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, I feel like if you're gonna talk about like just hands down like best ectoplasmic movie scenes, like scenes in movies, I think Haunting in Connecticut has to be up there. Like it's pretty astounding. And you know, I don't know. I've had a few kind of passings, like comings and goings with Hollywood, and I was fortunate enough to meet the director, uh, who, oh gosh, his name is Peter Cromwell. Am I getting that right? I'm gonna regret it if I get it wrong, but Peter Cornwell. He Yeah, we took a meeting, like one of those general meetings you kind of do in the Hollywood way. And I mean, it was so hard not to just like grill him about that ectoplasm scene. I mean, it was just, I mean, it is amazing. Like, oh, I haven't seen it in a while. Like, I wonder if it holds up, but because that was like early-ish CGI,
Yeah.
like, yeah,
It's mid 2000s, I want to say.
yeah. I mean, it left its mark on me, so
Yeah.
maybe I shouldn't watch it again, but I do distinctly remember that being like, wow. I mean, it's on the poster for Pete's sake. Like it's there. Like
Yeah.
that's like why you go to Connecticut.
For a chance to experience ectoplasm. I hope I'm not the one experiencing it. I think I would be okay watching it happen to someone else.
I mean, that stuff looked painful. Like that to me, like it looked like it was just not going to be a fun
No.
time of
No.
chucking ectoplasm.
No. It's not like you can stop midway because you don't like it. You're in like this is happening.
Yeah. Yeah, the ectoplasm train has left the station, folks. Here, it is pulling in, whether you want to. Oh God, where am I going with this? Pulling like it is pulling out of the station. Oh yeah, it's pulling out of the station. So hop on board, choo choo.
I also really liked the idea that maybe this is what modern spiritualism would look like. Because when they, go to the house and kind of do the drugs for the first time, it is kind of like everyone around the table and like someone's kind of like leading everything. And it is like, back in the day, like in Huntington, Connecticut, they're looking back at that time, where people were desperate to commune with the dead out of grief. And this is how it went. So maybe the idea that this drug would be something close to a modern iteration of that.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm just obsessed with the Fox sisters. Like I love the kind of historical kind of the rooting of spiritualism within America in the kind of was it like present post Civil War era that like all of a sudden our nation had like wholesale death. Like just there was just up to that point prior to the Civil War, you were promised the good death, and now that was gone because family members, husbands, sons, they were all dying miles and miles away from home. So spiritualism comes around and says, hey, here, like we can communicate with your lost ones. Like we can reach over to the other side. And I know like just being fascinated with that idea and wanting to kind of root it in a contemporary setting. But in that kind of, I don't know, like I love procedural horror as well, like Flatliners, or like where there's like a process or a science to it all.
Yeah.
And I think seances and spiritualism kind of offer that in a very kind of like simplistic and yet like rooted in an emotion of like there's always that desire to like connect to someone who has passed on. And maybe the people who are overseeing it are exploiting that, maybe not, but like it is, I don't know, like I just love that idea.
Me too. And I mean, that leads into our topic, which is grief horror. People are willing to overlook a lot of things, with the desperation of grief. And if it means the chance to get in touch with someone who's passed.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting because I don't know. I mean, if someone were to come to me and say, hey, we have the capacity to reach out and touch, like reach out and communicate with someone from my life, from someone that I've lost, there would be that moment of like, I miss my grandfather. I miss my like the people who are no longer here. And I would be hard pressed to say no if
Mm-hmm.
it was presented in that way that felt like this is true. This is grounded in fact. So yeah, I couldn't, I would not turn it down. Um, yeah.
Yeah, that would be, I mean, that'd be tough. What do you think about grief works well within the horror genre?
It's funny because I feel like there's always been this notion of horror being a roller coaster, that there's a certain kind of like the catharsis for the reader, the audience member, is that you're exorcising personal, like that maybe you're tapping into that kind of like death phenomenon, like
Mm-hmm.
you're so close to experiencing something that it's safe, it's contained, you're you're experiencing the death impulse without actually dying or being within the realm of dying. It's a very succinct way of saying something, and I'm totally mealy mouthing it. But I do think that, like, for grief, horror is, I mean, I believe that, like, there's something to be said about characters that kind of mirror our own sense of loss, or our own sense of God, I want to say negative space. Like, I mean, I myself feel like I'm just thinking of like all the people that I've lost in my life, and still feeling haunted by them. And I think with Ghost Eaters, there was this whole notion of like, well, what, like, really asking the question of like, what is it to feel haunted by someone who is no longer in your life? And I think, we speak specifically of like haunted houses being, when something is haunted, it's usually because a certain trauma happened within those environments, those locations, that physical geography that roots the ghost or the spirit to that location. And to me, like, when you think about losing someone, being like we're, I don't know, like I just think that there's something to be said about wanting to kind of either re-experience or have the catharsis of tapping into that grief impulse, or that feeling of loss. And I think horror just does that. Like, I think ghost stories do that. Like, whether it's very specific to grief or not, like, there's, like, in its very DNA, a ghost story is about someone no longer on this plane being on the other. And whether that's in a haunted house or a haunted shoe or a doll, I mean, like, who knows? But like, there is something to be said about having the story itself, or the genre itself, bridging the gap between um, what is no longer in this world, and maybe just perhaps the possibility of kind of reaching out and connecting with those people that we've lost.
I think so too. I think it is, just as a genre, perfectly set up to answer those questions and play with that idea, those what ifs.
Yeah, it's funny because I think in film, like, I think there's this kind of basic construct when it and it's usually in the first 5 minutes of a film. uh Imagine our protagonist loses someone near and dear to them. They lose a child, they lose a loved one, their significant other, and then they're kind of posed with this kind of existential threat, that whether it's a Babadook or a ghost of some sort. It They have to kind of like overcome their sense of loss, their sense of grief, and it's only through this monstrosity, or this entity, that they're able to kind of let go of the person, the kind of special, whoever that is that they've lost. and by the end of the film, they tend to be, I air quote this, but they tend to be healed. Like there's something that they've like come out the other end, and it's like I'm able to let go of my wife, my husband, my child, and all it took was a Babadook.
Which I agree, and it does lead well into the next section where we talk about films that talk about grief and horror, and yeah, The Babadook is definitely one of them.
Totally. I mean, oh God, like I, I mean, the Babadook is so. I don't want to give spoilers, but like
Yeah.
what I love about the Babadook is that it's so. It almost like the healing kind of creates its own new family. Like there's a new kind of dynamic at the end of that film that usually the hero or heroine like kind of washes
Mm-hmm.
their hand of the experience and they're like, yay, I'm a better person now. Where the Babadook, it almost kind of folds in on itself and is like, well, we can be a family too. We've created this new quasi supernatural nuclear dynamic, and it's I find that really touching in its own way. I find that ending of Babadook touching, is what I'm saying.
Yes, I love the ending. I mean, the idea that this is something that we're always going to live with. It might just be smaller and more manageable, but it's always going to be there.
Totally, totally. Um, yeah, I feel like I have a little Babadook in my basement, but only a little one.
I would say, like, recently I've seen a big trend in kind of this, like, grief as haunted house or trauma. Like, I've saw that in Netflix's His House. I don't know if you saw that.
Yes. God, I love that. I think did that come out last year, 2021? It certainly was a pandemic movie. I know that
Yes.
much. And it felt like oh man, I love that film. And I loved, you know, while I was writing Ghost Eaters, like just the ability to kind of imbibe these books or these films that really kind of focus on haunted environments. And I just love the idea that with his house, like it took the notion of a haunted space and I wouldn't say it reinvented it, but it definitely played with the trope and like kind of pushed the geography around in such a way that it felt fresh and new, and definitely one of my favorite films of whatever era, whatever year or time it came out.
I think it's one we're going to look back on in this, like, 2020s. And I would like to think that it's gonna be a standout when people look at this decade.
Oh, it totally holds up. That's gonna last forever.
I mean, the opening of Midsummer too. I mean, we're dealing with Danny's grief for that that movie.
Oh Lord, you know, what did you think of Midsummer? Did you like it?
I had kind of complicated feelings about it, but I mean, I was so tense and on the edge of my seat. Like, I was mesmerized.
It's so funny because I feel like when I think of Midsummer, I can't I can't cleave it from Hereditary.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like the kind of one-two punch of those two films, I think from what I've experienced of Ari Aster and his films, which I love, which I like the watching Hereditary, I felt like was such a traumatic experience. Like I honestly I do not feel like I have been that exhausted emotionally by a film in quite some time. And I think preparing for Midsummer, it I braced myself for that. In the opening, I feel like it's all there, and it's almost this kind of like ski slalom of trauma, grief that kind of launches you into this beautiful, colorful palette that, in a weird way, is it's like extremely cathartic. Um, I I think I saw Midsummer as something of not a romantic comedy, but a kind of comedy of errors that like it felt like cathartic in a way, liberating in a way that Hereditary wasn't. Hereditary was suffocating to me. I didn't breathe through the whole time of watching Hereditary. But Midsummer, it's just like, let it go, let it. I mean, like the whole thing, like at the end, it's just like it, like that's there for the audience. It's just like let it out, like let the grief go, like let the relationship go. And it's I don't know, like I kind of followed suit, and the film kind of let me become, what was it, the Mayfair queen? Like I felt like I was like the spring princess by the end of the movie, because we survived it, we made it, we're on the other end, and like we might not last much longer, but at least for now we get to wear the garland and not the bear costume.
Yes, that movie I think had a lot, I think, with catharsis. I think also the scene that I feel like is so powerful is the women crying with her and, like hyperventilating with her, and just, this whole movie she's just dying to be seen and acknowledged with her grief, and she's just being brushed off by Christian the whole time. And yeah, just that first time that someone sits with her and sits with her in her devastation. It's like,
Yeah. Do you remember what the did you watch it at home? Did you watch it in a theater? Like
in the
what
theater.
was the experience? Were you around other people? Like do you remember the experience of watching that crying breathing scene?
I mean, I remember it was just silent.
Yeah. I I was in Scotland. It was just so weird. It was such a strange experience. Like I was in Scotland, and I was it was like it was almost a matinee. And so
Mhm.
like there was a handful of us watching it, and we get to that moment, and we've gotten through everything else. Like we've endured and survived everything up until that moment. And like and this is going to sound negative, but it honestly isn't. Like I'm being very sincere about this. But like we all started, like the audience kind of collectively had this like moment of laughter where it was just like, oh my God. Like it was like the release of the moment was like, what? Like I think it was the kind of the same thing of like, what the heck is going on here? But it was just like the sheer audacity of it. Like we just like were like, this is insane. And it it was so, I don't know, like it just felt so freeing in a way.
Mhm.
Um where like I still like when I think of Hereditary now, like I still shackle up because I don't think I've exhaled the air I breathed during the watching of Hereditary. Um, but yeah, I feel like with Midsummer, it was just like, let it go, let it go.
I love Hereditary though.
I mean, Hereditary is great. It's great, but it's unforgiving. It is
It is.
unrelenting.
I watched it with my husband who hates horror movies. Um, and I think in kind of
You
like a
made
hand
him
wavy.
watch that.
Well, I didn't know it was going to be that bad. Like it was a first time watch for me too.
Oh
But
my
like
God.
I don't think he considers himself someone that gets like scared at movies, and he was terrified.
I mean, there's just no two ways about it. Like that is, I'm gonna close my eyes and you're gonna ask me like, what is the best movie of the last 20 years? And it's gonna be Hereditary, hands down, for me. And it's because it's I think the shape of it, the architecture of it, like the design of it, it's just there's no, I don't know, like I it just felt like such a the complexity of it was so confounding, and I loved it. But yeah, it's about trauma, it's about grief, and it won't let me go. It won't let me go. Am I saying this right? It won't let me let go of my grief.
Yeah, that one is not one for catharsis.
No, no, no. Go for Midsummer. Midsummer, you get the catharsis, I think.
You get the
Hereditary, you
fire.
hold on to it.
And my last pick on here I have is Lake Mungo.
So good. So good. How did you find it?
I had heard Paul Tremblay talking about it because I know that was a big influence for him for the disappearance at Devil's Rock, and that was the first time I had ever heard anyone talk about it. And I remember a few years ago, it like finally came on like Amazon Prime or Shudder, and I was like, now I'm gonna see it. And I sat there like on my couch, just tears streaming down my face. How about you?
I mean, I think it was one of these weird. For a while there were this series called like Eight Films to Die For, or it's like that. I think it was like After Dark or something like that. It's been a while, but it was basically kind of like a gathering of either direct to DVD films or films that just hadn't gotten theatrical releases. In Lake Mungo was one of them, and it's I think it's a little unfortunate because I think a lot of the films in those series weren't necessarily of the caliber of Lake Mungo, so I came in with very, very low expectations, but then was just utterly blown away by it. And I mean, it's so deceptive because it's like, because it's a found footage film, you're expecting this Blair Witch rehash, and it's just not. It is this mournful tone poem that is, I just find it unlike any other found footage film, any horror film really. Like, it's funny you mentioned the Paul Tremblay comparison and the disappearance at Devil's Rock, because which makes me think of Peter Weir's film. Why am I blanking suddenly on Peter Weir's amazing film? The one that's about the disappearance of the students. I'm not going to pull it out, but there's this great, amazing Peter Weir film that someone is going to have to remind me of, and I'm going to remember as soon as this is over, and I'm going to be totally embarrassed. But yeah, there's so many of these. There's so few of these pivotal films where it's like it focuses on the notion of loss, but it feels, I don't know, it feels very palpable. Like Lake Mungo feels like you're actually talking to real people, and you're watching real people kind
Yeah.
of talk about their loss. And whenever those parents are being interviewed, oh my God, it's just heartbreaking, totally heartbreaking.
And I mean, yeah, that whole movie is. And I mean, they also, try to reach out, and just all their attempts to try to connect with their daughter and find out what happened is just rips my heart out.
Yeah. And it's funny because I feel like I've watched that movie two or three times, and it's always kind of like there's this kind of analytical eye towards like, well, what makes this film so potent? Like, what makes it work? And in that film, more than a lot, I feel is very confounding, because it's not, there are very few scares in it. There's very few kind of like jump out kind of boogity boo moments. And yet the ones that are there, they're really grounded in this this pathos, this emotion, that it's like what is the feeling that goes beyond scare, that's like I'm experiencing a supernatural event. I'm seeing a ghost, or I'm seeing something, and it's not scary, but it's something other. And it's like I don't know, like it's that weird, like the ability to kind of like it almost kind of opens up the world in such a way that a lot of ghost movies don't, because it's like, I don't know. I guess I'm trying to say, like, this movie makes me believe in ghosts in a way that a lot of haunted house movies don't make me feel like don't believe in ghosts. Like, I watch Lake Mungo and I say, oh my God, that moment where you see something and you're like, that feels real. And I'm watching it. I know it's a movie, but I feel like I believe in the supernatural now.
I mean, it does feel real. I think with the found footage style, it doesn't have the polish of like a scripted character style of movie. Yeah, where everyone just feels real, and the way it's done, it just really feels like a documentary. Like you forget you're watching a like found footage
Totally.
movie. And I think like Paul Tremblay said that they used like the time accurate recording equipment of the time, so it's like very true to that time.
Yeah. It's so funny. Paul Tremblay, I feel like I've noticed Paul Tremblay like go on record like on several occasions. Like he will go to bat for that film. So I think Lake Mungo owes a little bit of box office to Tremblay for bringing the audience to that one.
I think so. I'm sure the people at Shutter were like, I mean, I guess he keeps talking about it. We'll really try to get the rights to it. I don't know how streaming works. I don't know if that's like
Someone
goes.
in streaming central Someone in streaming central is like, we've noticed a sudden uptick in Lake Mungo views. What's Paul Tremblay doing right now? Oh, yep, he tweeted about it again. Well, he gets his 5 cents per click, I guess.
He's an affiliate with Shutter. He gets a little.
Oh my god, he should be. We
Yeah.
should all invest in Shutter.
This episode is brought to you by Fangoria, the world's best horror and cult film magazine since 1979. Listeners can use code BOOKSINTHEFreezer to get 20% off their order. That includes, of course, merchandise and first-time subscriptions and single issues of the magazine. Not only are there tons of articles and interviews about upcoming horror movies, there's a regular segment by Stephen Graham Jones all about slashers called Slasher Nation, so you're going to want a copy. So again, that is code BOOKSINTHEFreezer, and thank you, Fangoria, for supporting the show.
Are we ready to talk about some books?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So my first book is This Thing Between Us by Gus Moreno. This came out, I want to say, last year, but it's about a man, Thiago, and his wife, Vera, who live in a refurbished condo in Chicago. She wants to buy Itza, who's kind of the latest and greatest smart speaker. But weird things start happening. Like there's like cold spots, like weird packages end up at the door. There's like scratching in the walls. Then Vera is killed. Obviously, Tiago is devastated. Unfortunately, he has to dodge pundits and reporters that want to use her death for political gain. Even in his grief, he can't just grieve his wife. Like everyone wants to like take her story as well. So he decides to get away from Chicago and go to a secluded cabin in Colorado, but he can't get away from it. Not the grief, not the pain, not the terror. I was thumbing through this and I skimmed through the first 2 chapters of this because it opens up at Vera's funeral, and I was like crying just skimming through those first 2 chapters because it is written in this like second person where he's talking to Vera. And he's like, here I am at your funeral, and like all these people are saying these things about you, and like they don't know you like I know you, and like this is what it's like to be like the widower at your wife's funeral, and like I wish you were here so we could talk about this experience and like how wild it is. Oh my gosh, like I was just like, it's a little more emotional than that. He says, these feelings weren't new to the world, but that didn't stop it from feeling like they were. The world was pressed against my nose, too close to see. I had no story to follow. My favorite character was gone. And it starts out as kind of the elements of a haunted house story. And I think like the Itza is not the driving factor of the story. I think the way it's marketed kind of leads you to believe that that's going to be like, this was the thing. This was the mastermind. But it is bigger than that. So it's a haunted house story that eventually becomes a cosmic horror story. I really liked it. Absolutely emotionally devastated me. Rating wise, on our scariness rating scale, temperature wise, I would say it's fridge. The first half is pretty emotional. The second half, I think, really starts to develop the lore and lean a little more into the horror. And there's some gnarly scenes, including animal death. People want to know. So there is animal death in it. That is This Thing Between Us by Gus Moreno.
Wow. My first choice is Remains by Andrew Cull. And gosh, when did this book come out? I think this book came out in 2019. I think Andrew lives in Australia. I'm not
Mhm.
sure. This is an amazing book. It is, I personally was not prepared for this book to be as unrelenting as it was. But let's see if I can. I'm going to do a terrible of it. Basically, about a mother named Lucy, and her son Alex has been brutally murdered. I mean, it's it's terrifying. It is a very painful read. Um, but then Lucy has a kind of nervous breakdown after what happens, and she is institutionalized for a bit, and then she's ultimately released. And then when she comes out, I think it's like 6 months later, like half a year later, um, she she's following this kind of guiding force, this guiding presence, um, to an abandoned house, to the abandoned house where her son was murdered. And it's there that Lucy, in essence, experiences what I guess you could say is a very supernatural, very terrifying, very eerie presence that may or may not be her son. I found this book to be, like I think there's certain kind of grief horror books that basically kind of dare you, like it's basically like you want to feel grief, like you want to feel the feeling that this character is having, this narrator is having. And I think Andrew did a really amazing job, kind of like, I mean, it's like it feels like I'm getting raked over emotional coals, like I'm getting it, like it's like a cheese grater to the heart. And beyond the kind of fear of it, there's a lot of pain and pathos to it, which I think kind of makes it all the more terrifying. Um, so I believe, uh, let me take a moment to kind of gauge the kind of variations. There's room temperature, there's refrigerator, and there's freezer.
Mhm.
And we're saying room temperature is like meh, refrigerator is like and then freezer is like
It's not a quality rating, but it's like a scariness, like I guess approachability. Like the average person handle this.
I don't know if the average person could handle this. This feels like it's grueling. Like and it's not even the scare. It's a scary book, but I feel like it's an approachably scary book. It's really the level of grief. Like I think you have to kind of go into it knowing that it's like meant to hurt you. So like you might need to help me. Like where does that, like, is that a, like, emotionally I'm freezer. Like I want to warn people that it's like you have to be prepared to get hurt. Um the scary stuff almost becomes kind of a relief in comparison to the kind of the turgid, painful kind of like emotional quality to this heroine's sense of loss. She feels it. Andrew really made this character feel it, and therefore, like, you as the reader feel it, and that's cruel.
Yeah, I mean, she's greater to the heart. That is. I'm like, I am scared, but now I need to read this immediately. So maybe freezer.
Freezer, emotional freezer, scary
Emotional.
refrigerator, emotional freezer.
That's a good scale.
It's an emotional freezer. So you open up the freezer and you find your grief frozen into a block of ice. That sounds terrible, but that's what I meant. It's like your heart is now in the ice tray after it's
Oh
been
man.
grated into these fine little flakes.
Oh, that sounds painful. Now I must read this. My next pick is The Third Hotel by Laura Vandenberg. This is a novella. This is about a widow who takes her late husband's place at a film festival in Havana. He was a horror film scholar. She's processing the complicated emotions after his loss. And while she's in Havana, she thinks that she sees him at the festival. And so she has to process that. She obviously goes to like chase him down, but he's elusive and keeps like cutting into things. So, and this story was fascinating. I think it's a little more reflective than scary, and I would say horror adjacent. So very room temperature here. But with her husband being this like horror film scholar, she does talk about horror quite a bit. Like she says, horror films had taught her that a person could will a thing into existence, but once it was outside their consciousness, the consciousness that had been busily inventing simultaneous possibilities became a force unto itself, ferocious and uncontrollable. What I like about it is she had a very complicated relationship with her husband. I would say it's not like this thing between us where it's like these people just had this very straightforward love for each other and now there's a loss. Like they were going through a place where their marriage was stilted and she was traveling a lot for work and kind of choosing to be away and now is having to deal with the emotions of that now that she's a widow. And the book is a lot about like liminal spaces, and I guess she's in this liminal like I'm not married anymore, but I wouldn't consider myself single. What is this new phase of life that I'm in? So it's a little more sad and reflective in that way. But there are horror elements, and it does kind of delve into the like surreal metaphysical later. So it's a little trippy of a book, and I would say it is not for everyone. I feel like when I read books, you know, being a podcaster, I kind of have to think of like not only my enjoyment, but like other like how is this gonna like come across to a lot of people. So I would say this is probably not a book for everyone, but it's one that very much worked for me. I really loved this book. So that is The Third Hotel by Laura Vandenberg.
Okay, my next choice is Julia by Peter Straub. Straub? That sounds kind of right?
Yeah,
Straub?
sure.
Peter Straub. Julia. It is what is Julia about? Julia is a woman in London who has kind of an overbearing husband, and she's left him because at the beginning of the book their daughter dies, and it's extreme. It's very traumatic. It's a real rough one. But their daughter dies. The relationship is just broken. And she leaves and kind of moves into a new house. She either rents it or buys it, but she's basically like she moves into a space to be by herself, and away from her husband, who is a real jerk. And it's while she's in this house that she begins to suspect that she's not alone. And at first she believes that maybe it is the ghost of her daughter who is coming back to establish contact with her. But it turns out that maybe that's not true. And I don't want to go too much further. It is a book that, I mean, this book came out in the 70s. I think it was one of Peter Straub's earlier books, like maybe his second or third book. It was made into this pretty interesting movie called, it's been called a lot of different things. I think when it was originally released, it was called Full Circle. But then I think upon like either a subsequent release or a VHS DVD release, they started calling it The Haunting of Julia. But it stars a post Rosemary's Baby Mia Farrow, who's amazing in it. And I will cop to I'll confess that I saw the movie first before reading the book. So I have a weird kind of experience of having cast Mia Farrow in the movie version in my head as I was reading the book, which is always kind of unfair to the books that you read after you've seen the movies. But I I want to recommend this book. It is total room temperature. It is a very sedate kind of story where like the kind of supernatural elements, the hauntings of it, are kind of on the periphery of the book and the movie, I guess you could say, where any kind of terror or dread is felt by way of what's happening kind of on the outskirts of the story. It's almost like you have to. It's like, which I honestly think are the best ghost stories out there, where it's like imagine you are looking at something, and then from the corner of your eye you see something, and so when you stop and turn and see if you can see what it is, it's gone, and you're like, oh, I totally think I just saw a ghost, or I saw something. That is what Julia does, where it's like it's not something you see head on, like it's always the periphery, or it's always kind of on the outskirts of the narrative. And I think that's a very specific style of ghost story that a lot of readers will probably find frustrating or a little confounding, because it just doesn't give it to you. But the ending really packs a wallop in my mind, and I'm going to make a even worse confession and admit I think I might like the ending of the movie better than the book. Um, but it's so rare. Um, but I think that like the book and the movie are kind of baked together in my imagination, for better or for worse. But I would definitely say it is a gauzy, light, kind of ethereal haunting story
Hmm.
where you're basically just kind of experiencing this thing, and it's like, like this feels very feeling like, oh, like something bad just happened, like, oh, like it it never bludgeons you over the head. um so I would recommend the 1-2 punch of reading the book first, then watching the movie, because the movie has probably one of the best endings of any spooky supernatural ghost movie I've ever seen. Um, the ending is almost far better than anything else in the movie, but you have to kind of watch the rest of the movie to get to the really good part. Um, but yeah, Julia by Peter Straub.
Ooh, I will have to check that out. I know the movie was streaming on Shudder last year. I don't know if it's still there. But now I'm curious. I'm gonna have to look and see.
It's worth it. I mean, like, drink your coffee. Like it's like you kind of need to be awake for it. Like it's
Mhm.
it's it's a movie that like, you know, this is not a criticism, but it's like nothing happens, and then like nothing happens, and then everything happens. Like it's like it's kind of one of those where it's like, oh, okay. Um, but yeah, I love the ending. Just love the ending, and it's yeah, I think like to kind of root it in our conversation about grief makes us do stupid things sometimes. and
Mhm.
and I think that like, because our defenses are down and our hearts are down, uh we make choices that we either should not make or would not make if we were any other kind of sound body and mind. And the grief impulse kind of makes us more daring or makes us more cavalier. And Julia, I think, is a really interesting example of a woman following her grief to places that I, as the reader, or me as the audience, are saying, don't do that, don't go there. That's the wrong, like, don't go in that house. Damn it.
My final pick is The Good House by Tananarive. And I was trying to find a way to like explain this, and then I'm like, you know what? The Goodreads synopsis is like one sentence, and it just seems to like kind of just nail it. So, working to rebuild her law practice after her son dies by suicide, Angela Toussaint's journey to the family home where the suicide of her son took place, hoping for answers, discovers an invisible evil force that is driving locals to acts of violence. This was very good. I really enjoy Tananarive. Like, I've pretty much enjoyed everything I've read by her. And yeah, this is about a woman kind of going back to her family's house. Like, this house has been in her family for several generations in this town in Washington. And in the beginning of the book, we do know that her son died by suicide in the house. And it's like she's now finally ready to go back to the house and like live in the town and spend time there and kind of deal with things. But then as the story is going on, you find out that things might not have been as straightforward as they seem, and there might be some things that were put in place several generations ago. And there's a sense of like generational trauma and racism and a lot of things that are all contributing factors to this. And I personally struggle with like really long books. This book is over 500 pages. It's like almost 600 pages. And I flew through it like with the audiobook. Like, I could not put this book down. And I think it's just like also just a very good haunted house story for people that like haunted house stories like me. And I thought not only that, it has like a very good lore and reason for the haunting. Like, it is established like why this is happening. Here is like where it happened, and now we are seeing the consequences of this thing. So that I would say it's fridge. There's some pretty scary scenes, but I'd say mostly approachable. So that is The Good House by Tananarive.
Nice. Okay, my last recommendation is Come With Me by Ronald Malfi. And oh man, this is a tough one because I feel like I wanna do it justice, and there's no way I'm gonna be able to do it justice. It's there's a man, a husband by the name of Aaron, and his wife is she dies, and it's in a like real horrible tragic way. I don't know if I want to give away why. I mean the book is very open about how she dies, but like I feel like it's not a spoiler, but I don't want to spoil it. She's killed, and you know suddenly Aaron starts to kind of go through like in the kind of grieving process and trying to kind of you know not not pick up, but like just kind of get life back in order. He starts to go through her stuff and clean up her personal belongings, and she's a journalist, and she in essence kind of uncovers all of these different secrets, and things that she had been working on before she was killed, um, that kind of lead him to like he kind of goes on this kind of mournful walkabout to try to figure out the things that she was doing that like he had absolutely no idea about. And it was like maybe it was for a story, maybe some underlying mystery is happening that she kept completely to herself. He was completely unaware of it, and now that she's gone and he has nothing but all of this information, he decides to try to find out what she was working on. Because at first he thinks maybe she was having an affair, but that's not the case. But yeah, it's basically he picks up where she left off, in order to find out what she was working on, what her search was. That is a terrible description for what is ultimately an amazing book. Um, it's so funny because like I read it maybe a year, almost maybe even like 2 years after it came out. Like I think it came out in, oh no, it came out in 2021. So like I read it after, like there's this huge kind of initial kind of like, oh my God, you got to read this book. This book is amazing. And I was like, okay, I'll read it. But I think I waited too long because the hype cycle had kind of come and gone. So it's not that I came to it begrudgingly, but I came to it like okay, everybody else loves this book, so let's see what all this hype is about. And then I read it and I was like, oh my God, the hype is real. The hype is this is legit. And I felt like I'm ready to eat crow. Like I'm ready to like it like cop to my own naivete and just say Ronald Malfi is amazing, and like I want to grow up to be Ronald Malfi, because this book, it it's scary, and I'm gonna give it a fridge because there are kind of terrifying, kind of freezery moments, but like the terror never eclipses the emotional pathos, which I think really kind of drives the piece home. And it's not a criticism, but it was like I almost got so grumpy the more supernatural the book became. Like I almost like there is a I'm not going to encroach upon spoiler territory, but like the thing that is guiding him along, the kind of mystery, like I didn't want the mystery anymore. I just wanted to watch this man kind of go through the process of understanding his grief and like how to get through it, so that when you reach the end, you know, if you haven't read it, this is where you want to pause this podcast. And I'm just going to say the ending for this book blew my mind in such a way that was just like, you know, it's so rare that a book, like you look for these books, you're hunting for these books. Like, you know, we've been reading for however many years, decades at this point, but like for a book now in this day and age, at our age, my age, to like just blow my mind and just like just drop the jaw, like this Come With Me did that. And I'm gonna just bow down at the altar of Malfi from here on, because he did such an amazing job.
That was also a book that blew me away when I read it. I think it was one of my favorite books of, was it 2020, 2021? Again, I don't know time. What is time? But the year that it came out, it was one of my favorite books. I cried several times reading it, and I think just the honest, raw emotions that are felt, and also like this thing between us, it's kind of written in this like second person where he's like talking to his dead wife and kind of like rationalizing, and you know, sometimes being like, this is how I'm feeling right now, like I'm angry at you for this, and like I miss you this, and it's just all these emotions just being like thrown out there.
It's so amazing. Yeah, I never want them to make a movie of it, TV series of it. Like I don't want them to. I just want it to like remain this totem, because it's so, I don't know. It is a near perfect book. Definitely one of the best pandemic books, whatever year that was that it came out.
I agree.
This episode is brought to you by Libro FM. Libro FM is the first and only company which lets you purchase audiobooks directly from your favorite local bookstore. You can pick from more than 150,000 audiobooks, including bestsellers and recommendations from booksellers. You'll get the same audiobooks at the same price as the largest audiobook company out there. You know the name. But you'll be part of a different story, one that supports community. If you're new to audiobooks, they're the perfect way to get more books into your busy life. Listen during your commute, while doing chores, walking the dog, or just relaxing at home. All you need is a smartphone and the free Libro FM app. If you already love audiobooks and don't know what to listen to next, check out recommendations and curated lists from people who know audiobooks best. Booksellers. And us. We also have a playlist on there full of books that have been recommended on this podcast. Books in the Freezer special offer. You get 2 audiobooks for the price of one, just $14.99, with your first month of membership using code FreezerBook. This offer is valid for new members in Canada and the United States. Thank you, Libro FM, for supporting the show.
Well, should we pivot to some chilling obsessions?
Yeah. Can you explain to me what our chilling obsessions are? Like, is it that just anything that I'm excited about or feeling giddy about in horror?
Yeah, like anything you've been enjoying, podcast, book, movie, show. Like anything recently you're like, you know what? This has been pretty good and it's been making me happy.
Maybe it's just for the fact that we've been talking so much about grief horror, but I should name check Gabino Iglesias's most recent novel, The Devil Takes You Home, which is in of itself a grief horror. It's so many different things: barrio noir, mystery, thriller, horror, but like it's grounded in grief. That to me, yeah, I felt like that was such a wonderful book. Definitely going to be one of the highlights of the year. I just saw Nope. Nope was amazing. Did you see Nope?
Not yet. My husband's going out of town next week though, so I have it like all planned out. We're like, I'm gonna be like downstairs on the big TV and like rent it, and just like the kids are in bed. I'm just gonna like fully enjoy myself, like plan for it. But you liked it. It was good.
I did. Yeah, it is a great movie. It's like one of the things that makes it so singular is that it's not what you think it is. It's not what you expect it to be. And I think I should shut up about it now because I think it should be your experience. And so many, like, it's so rare to have a singular experience like Nope. And I think Jordan Peele is doing an exceptional job of making singular cinematic experiences. Like everything feels new and novel and fresh. And Nope, like everybody wants to come into Nope thinking they know what Nope is, and it's not. So yeah,
I know.
I think that means you have to see it twice.
Not to bring any preconceived notions into my viewing.
What are your obsessions? Do you have any?
Ooh, I recently watched Orphan First Kill on Paramount Plus, and I didn't know what to expect. I was not a big fan of Orphan, the first one. I have tried to get through it multiple times. I don't know. I think evil kid horror is not my jam. But this one was so fun, I think, in a way that the first one wasn't. This one just kind of leaned into its like craziness and bonkers energy that it has throughout. And Julia Stiles, I don't know where she's been, but we need to put her in more horror movies. Like, she was great in this.
Total.
Did you watch this?
I did.
Yeah.
I liked it. It's so funny when the bar is so low and you're pleasantly surprised. Like
Yeah.
it totally, it did the thing that, like, you're not paying attention to the movie and then all of a sudden it sucker punches you and it's like, yeah, I know, like, okay, here we go again. And then it's like, wait a minute, like the people behind this actually, they know what they're doing and they just totally take you for a ride.
It really was, because I mean, it's a prequel, so you're going into it like, yeah, I know her whole deal is that, she is, I mean, not going to spoil the first one, but there is like something going on with this, girl who's an orphan. And in the first one, we see that like she's done this before. So this is the she's done this before part of it. So you kind of go into it like, okay, but I know how the story's going to go.
Yeah. It was a total lark. I loved it. I mean, like, it's so funny. Like, who would have thought we would be talking about the sequel to Orphan, and like, I think it's just a testament to like there's got to be something said about a movie that earns its audience, and that movie works hard to not only earn back the whoever the Orphan fans are, but the Orphan non-fans, like the detractors of Orphan. Like I think I've heard more people be like, I hated Orphan, but I love Orphan First Kill. And that's saying something. That's a
It is.
testament to like the success of a good movie.
I saw someone post, yeah, the Rotten Tomatoes score for critics and audience is much higher than it is for Orphan. And he was just like, how often does this happen?
I mean, I don't know if
Like,
I'm
I don't
gonna
know, it's just fun.
I can't in clear conscience defend the first Orphan, but I will say it was at least it was kind of doing that thing where it's like we're taking ourselves seriously. Maybe they
Mhm.
took themselves a little too seriously, but they really wanted to go for it. Like they wanted to do that like I think The Ring is like a an example of like a movie, a horror movie that like adults can go to and not feel guilty for like seeing a horror movie. Like it feels it's like mature horror.
Mhm.
I think Orphan was trying to be mature and and maybe missed the mark of what it could have been. And I think Orphan First Kill does a good job of like being like, you know what? Let's just have fun.
Yeah. Like, we know what we're doing here. I mean, and Orphan 1 does have its fans. I asked on Twitter, I'm like, I feel like everyone has a comfort, like, dark castle movie from the 2000s. And a lot of people came out and said it's Orphan. I'm like, I was expecting a lot more, like, 13 Ghosts, House on Haunted Hill.
Maybe Ghost Ship, maybe Gothica, but no, no, it's got to
I,
be
I ride hard for House of Wax.
oh wow. Got to go Paris.
I just felt like that was also just like a fun one that I went into it thinking like I went into it like rolling my eyes like oh yeah like Paris Hilton and I was like that was fun, that was like ridiculously fun.
Totally, totally.
All right, well, our last tradition on this podcast is to ask guests for a final girl song to add to their playlist. So what is your pick?
Oh man. I don't know if I'm bending the rules here because by sheer definition, final girl is the one who survives. And I think the lyrics of this song suggest that this final girl is no longer with us, but I I'm one of those kind of uh sad white boys who likes to listen to sad indie rock music. Um and there's a band called Neutral Milk Hotel, and they have a song called "Oh Calmly" off of their album "In the Aeroplane Over the Sea." And "Oh Calmly" is a 7 minute like magnum opus, like acoustic, like just opera uh, of maybe it's about Anne Frank, maybe it's not Anne Frank, maybe it's someone else or just some girl in World War II, some like but there's something to be said about the kind of transcendent quality of this song. And when I think of surviving, I think of like transcending one's own kind of trauma or whatever the kind of traumatic event is. And this song, I think one interpretation of this song, because it is again a very the lyrics are a bit opaque, but like I feel like there's something to be said about surviving something that maybe we go on to some greater place or we survive by kind of like elevation. Um and and this song kind of really brings out a certain kind of transcendent notion of surviving through supernatural means or something more. And maybe it's spiritual, I don't know, but when I listen to this song, it 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 elevates me. And I feel like there is a certain kind of I'm gonna just keep saying the same word over and over again, but it feels transcendent. Like it feels like a spiritual elevation. So that to me speaks to the kind of final girlness. Um, I probably am gonna get points taken off my street cred, but it was the first thing that kind of came to my mind. And of course, as soon as this conversation's over, like I'm gonna think of like 5 other songs. I could have been like, oh, it could have been that one. It could have been that one. But yeah, I closed my eyes and I was like, oh, calmly, like Neutral Milk Hotel.
I love that. I'll have to check that out. I will admit my familiarity with Neutral Milk Hotel ends at In the Airplane Over the Sea.
Yeah, I love them. I love them. Maybe they're not for everybody. They're definitely for a lot of like hipsters in Brooklyn. But we like this is it's an amazing band, an amazing album. Like, I guess it's the kind of, I'm getting eye rolly towards myself here and I'm being self-critical, but you know, for all you JD Salinger, Holden Caulfield types out there who like to listen to moody indie rock, like Oh Comely by Neutral Milk Hotel.
I love moody indie rock, so I will be adding that to the playlist. And I mean, I have had people kind of go all kinds of different directions. Like when I had Ronald Malfi on the show, he picked a song that was like a bit more nihilistic. He's like, no one survives. This is just like the end.
No final girls, no final anybody.
There's no rules.
Yeah.
It's like Outback, no rules, just right.
Has someone picked Katy Perry, Roar?
They have not.
Oh my god. I don't know. Like I think I'm trying to think of like what is the lyrical equivalent to the end of The Descent, where you have
Which end?
the UK ending. Like I want to go through hell and like crawl out the other end and feel like we're free. But are we? Maybe not. Like I think surviving comes with there's a toll. There's a price to be paid, and it might be your own. Maybe you're not the final girl in reality, but maybe you are in your mind.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Man, thank you so much. Thank you for putting up with me. We got a lot of books to read now.
We do. So where can people find you online?
I'm on Twitter and I'm on Instagram and Facebook. Clay McLeod, which is ClayMcleod. Clay McLeod. But yeah, and I'm pretty Googleable.
All right. Well, thank you again, listeners. Be sure to check out Ghost Eaters when it drops.
Please do. Thank you so much.
Books in the Freezer is a bi-weekly podcast. We post episodes every other Tuesday. You can find us on Twitter at BooksFreezerPod, on Instagram at BooksInTheFreezer, on TikTok at BooksInTheFreezer, and you can send us an email at booksinthefreezer@gmail.com. Show notes for this episode and all previous episodes are at booksinthefreezer.com, where you'll find links to all of the books mentioned in this episode. This episode was recorded, as you can imagine, before the unfortunate passing of Peter Straub. So if you were wondering why we didn't mention that he had passed, that is why. At the Books in the Freezer website, you will also find links to our affiliate links like Amazon, Fangoria, and Libro.fm. Clicking on those and ultimately purchasing stuff does help the podcast out in a small way. And another way to do that is to become a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/booksinthefreezer. There's a $1, $3, and a $5 tier. With different perks at each tier. I think at the $1 tier, you get episodes early. At the $3 tier, there's like a group chat and we do movie nights. And $5 tier gets bonus episodes and gets to know who's going to be on the next episode, what it's about, so they can chime into that conversation if they want. So check that out if that sounds interesting to you. But of course, you do not have to spend any money to show your support for the show. Telling someone about it, posting about it on social media, online, writing things about it, all of those things are huge helps to the show. I saw that it was recently featured in the latest edition of Remorque magazine, and let me tell you, that absolutely made my day. Just things like that. Thank you so much to all of you. I feel like I really do have the best listeners in all the world. So thank you to all of you for being a part of this community. I'm Stephanie. You can find me on Twitter at lady_gagnon. That's LADYGAGNON. And yes, that is the unpronounceable name that I married into. Or you can find me on Instagram at That's What She Read. And that is That's with 2 A's. So see you next time on Books in the Freezer.